throttle high side. A nasty, violent pitch skywards over the handlebars of the factory KTM, a rather awkward landing. And Acosta said himself pretty fortunate and pretty relieved to escape relatively unscathed from this bruising crash. He likened it to a crash at Siberia in the Australian Grand Prix. Turn 6 down under, caught Acosta out last year, ruled him out of the Grand Prix, didn't it? Nasty one this, Lewis, and as he said, rather fortunate perhaps to get away without any kind of big knocks.
Yeah, it could have been an awful lot worse for Pedro Acosta, but either side of that crash, he was still very, very quick. As you saw there on screens, he was trying to go with Marc Marquez on a lap, and of course, not with Marc Marquez trying to go with Pedro Acosta over the course of the day, but doesn't appear to have knocked the pretty strong confidence that Pedro Acosta has at the best of times off his stride. A 1:37.061 yesterday for Acosta. At one point he was over half a second clear. Marc Marquez did close that gap down to just 0.06 of a second.
Well, pre-weekend, Alex Marquez spoke of his hopes of a clean and normal weekend, free from injury after the left wrist he fractured in Assen, cleared up now, and hopefully without any trouble with the F1 MotoGP stewards after he took a long lap penalty last time out in Spielberg. Sadly, he's been in hot water once again. Alex immediately back on the naughty step, Lewis, and both him and Jack Miller, 3-place grid penalty coming their way for slow online during that 60-minute practice session.
That's a penalty the best of times, but around a circuit such as this, where overtaking is expected to be difficult, Alex Marquez might pay a heavy price for that. You can see him already as he comes into turn one, shaking his head and waving his hands. He's waving in the general direction of Fabio Di Gianantonio, who's just up the road there. You can just see the VR46 Ducati up the road. Alex Marquez there waving at Jack Miller, saying, yeah, it was the rider in front of me that I'm unhappy with. Jack saying, no, you need to get on with this. Pecco Bagnaia catches all of this, and in the end is disturbed and distracted by both of them. Pecco Bagnaia has to roll off his lap, although his anger was much more directed at Alex than it was at Jack. Upshot of all of that, as Matt mentioned, is 3-place grid penalties for both Jack Miller and Alex Marquez. Jack Miller told me what you just saw, that he saw it all unfolding. He saw that Dicio had perhaps got in the way of Alex in the final sector. Alex Marquez, when I asked him for his view on it, he did try to offer up some sort of excuse in that a new circuit, a tight circuit such as this, not perhaps the easiest circuit to identify the best places and best ways to get out of the way, but without question, Alex did not pick one.
They are becoming reluctant regular clients of Mr. Simon Crafer, aren't they, in the steward's office right now. Alex busted with a long lap in Spielberg after his incident with Joan Mir in Brno. Of course, Jack Miller was fined €1,000 and suspended from 5 minutes of equity last weekend, having not gone off the racing line when his Yamaha was smoking. So yeah, they are becoming frequent visitors to the FIM stewards office. Some better news potentially emerging as far as Jack Miller's concerned. The 3-place grid penalty coming his way, but there are a lot of reports, a lot of gossip in the paddock here last night that he has indeed retained his seat in Prima Pramac Yamaha for 2026. We'll be keeping very, very close tabs on that story, which does seem to be unfolding throughout this weekend. Can we offer any sort of crumbs of comfort right now to a beleaguered Pecco Bagnaia, who really is in probably the darkest period of his Grand Prix career right now. 14th fastest yesterday, nearly 3/4 of a second he was behind Pedro Acosta. As we mentioned, his worst Friday since Valencia 2023. Second time in the last 3 Grand Prix he's going into Q1. Let's get some thoughts from the Gresini Ducati camp. Now, Fermin Aldeguer looking super strong once again yesterday, 4th fastest. Alex looking good in 3rd, but of course with the 3-place grid penalty coming his way. Let's get the thoughts of their boss, Michele Massini, who joined Jack. Good morning, gentlemen.
Everybody at home on this fine Saturday morning, on a cloud in the sky, sun shining here at Balaton Park. Michele, I think we spoke 30 minutes too soon yesterday. You said to us that you were hoping for a problem-free, a penalty-free weekend, and it looked to be that way until that late coming together with Pecco. In your opinion, what happened, and do you think that a 3-place grid penalty is a fair penalty?
Yeah, it was clearly that yesterday Alex in turn 1 was already angry because Diza hindered us, but anyway, it's true that we disturb to Jack because at the end we lose a bit the concentration, and you know Alex was one of the top rider on track. He always faster. Also, everybody try always to catch him for make a flying lap. So we have was in the middle of these things, and so we will try to extract the maximum from the qualifying to start at least in the second row tomorrow.
Obviously, the guys said yesterday that this circuit might not be the easiest to overtake at, with the penalty as well. It seems an obvious statement, but does it put extra pressure on qualifying? Because it seems vitally important that you have a good Saturday morning.
Yeah, the main point is that we need to be concentrated, don't think about the penalty. This is the main thing. It's not easy to be focused on that, but we will try.
And for Vermeer coming into the weekend, knowing that everybody was on a level playing field, we all thought it could be a big opportunity, but yesterday it looks as though he's grabbing that opportunity. He looked really fast.
Yeah, he started from zero like everybody. Was really fast. I have to say that was really fast also with the Panigale when we went for the testing. And so I think that is a good condition.
Thanks, Michele. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks to Michele Massini, Alex Marquez. He'll be desperate to minimise the damage of that incoming three-place grip penalty in qualifying coming up later on this afternoon. Of course, one of the main key topics of discussion with the riders yesterday was their first impressions of this tight and technical Balaton Park circuit. I think the verdict was it's a fun track to ride. It's pretty unique. A lot of slow speed chicanes in particular. But what was the overwhelming thing, I think, to emerge from the riders yesterday, Lewis, was overtaking is going to be very difficult around this 4.08 kilometre layout. Marc Marquez said it's going to be high risk to make passes, easy to make big mistakes on those runs, particularly into the chicanes when you're hard braking to turn 9, 12 and 15. No straights either to get slipstream or set up overtakes. And it's going to be a lunge or a dive bomb. I do wonder if Mr. Crayfire might be a busy man for the remainder of this weekend, because overtaking is going to be at a premium.
Jack Miller's just been into the gravel track there at turn 5 from the drone shot. Here he is. You can see gravel on his tyres, and we just saw him digging his way out of one of quite deep gravel traps around here. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Let's take a look first at this Jack Miller moment. So this is on the way. Turn 5 to the background. You're looking through from 6, and Jack Miller straight on. Exactly what Mark is talking about. You've got to try and brake as late as you can just to get the best possible lap around here. So if you brake another couple of meters later, you're almost certainly going to skate straight on and miss the corner. Yeah, they were saying, one of the riders yesterday, that you can perhaps get on the inside of someone into one of those chicanes, but it's impossible to stay on the racing line. You'll just be overtaken on the way out. Let's ride on board then with Pecco Bagnaia.
Tour guide, is he, around the Balaton Park circuit for double world champion Pecco Bagnaia, who told the media last night he always feared he might be in a bit of bother at Balaton. He came here, of course, with 5 other Ducati riders to ride the Panigale production bike here in the summer break, just to get acquainted with this tight complex. And he said then, even on a production bike, he knew the nature, the characteristics of this track: hard braking, trail braking with lean angle, and turning in the last part of the corner precisely the areas where Bagnaia has been struggling all season. He does lead this morning's FP2 session, so let's hope some overnight mods on that GP25 are helping Pecco get a little bit more competitive as Acosta. Is that Acosta and Marquez?
Marquez, yeah, down into turn one. Yeah, it's difficult to overtake Marquez at the best of times, let alone trying to run around the outside of him into turn one. This is what it looked like from Mark. Here comes the shark just over to Marquez's left. Mark has a look and says, yeah, you're not getting around there, Pedro. Very sorry, mate.
As Acosta pointed out yesterday, we briefly rode on board it with Marco Bezzecchi's factory Aprilia when Acosta was behind him on a much faster lap, and even though there was some speed differential between the two, we saw on the onboard how hard it was for Acosta to make any kind of move. I think we're going to see lots of lunges, a lot of dive bombs, as Marc Marquez alluded to yesterday. Jorge Martin said the track's so narrow, it's so easy to run wide. You have to be millimetre precise in these tight and hard braking zones. Otherwise, it's so easy to make a mistake. And it seems like, as well, the riders are saying even small errors, small mistakes here in Hungary come with big punishments. There's a little bit of loose tape there on the side of Pedro Acosta's factory KTM. Nothing too disturbing in terms of lap time, because Acosta, just as he was at the end of play yesterday, is back in P1, looking in great form, isn't he, so far this weekend, is the Shark.
Some 3/10 clear now of the factory Ducati duo. Pecco Bagnaia up in second place from Marc Marquez, although that's always going to chop and change in these early laps of the session. Yeah, Marc Marquez said yesterday that there aren't an awful lot of secrets yesterday, or not a lot of secrets around this circuit. It's quite a simple track to master, but that means that the lap times are all super close as he gets one of the chicanes wrong. And yeah, there was an interesting, funny little cameo as the interview that I conducted with Marc Marquez yesterday, which you can see on MotoGP.com, was about to get underway. He was in deep concentration, looking at his phone. You know, of course, didn't want to interrupt Marc Marquez as he was in such deep concentration. And I asked him, what are you looking at, Mark? He said, race pace. He was having a very close look at what everyone else was up against and what kind of opposition he might face. And I think one of the riders he will be watching very closely is this man, Pedro Acosta.
Yeah, I think Mark was still looking like the strongest, as he so often has proved on worn tyres. A 37.7 yesterday on a 17-lap old rear tyre. I mean, that would have put him around Jorge Martin, Marco Bezzecchi pace at the end of that session. And that was, of course, when Martin and Bez were on fresh soft rubber. We're going to see both the factory Aprilias coming up shortly in Q1 as a couple of the riders make a mess of the chicanes. Marc Marquez, that's a couple of times now we've seen Marc run on in these tight and twisty sections.
Yeah, Digia overshot the chicane and they got right in the way of one of the Aprilias. I think it was Bezzecchi who was right behind. So that didn't particularly help Bez's lap. Yeah, traffic was a big issue yesterday. Might not be quite as big a problem in qualifying this morning. So, of course, in each of the qualifying sessions, we're going to have a maximum of 12 riders on the racetrack, but that could still play a role in who qualifies where.
Now, one of the big unanswered questions heading into 2026 is who will be top track lads. Gatlioglu's teammate down at Prima Pramac Yamaha. It seems like it's been a toss-up between Jack Miller, Miguel Oliveira, and possibly Moto2 World Champions leader Manu Gonzalez. Lots of rumours last night here in Hungary that Jack Miller has won the fight to keep his seat in the Italian team. Lots going on, of course, on and off the track right now for Prima Pramac Yamaha. But one man who'll certainly be in the know is the boss, Gino Borsoy, who joins Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. Just firstly, obviously, Jack Miller given a three-place grid penalty yesterday, Gino, for that coming together involving Pecco Bagnaia, Alex Marquez. Do you feel 3 places for Jack was a fair penalty?
Well, we saw the video yesterday and the reiteration. We understood perfectly, but the position of Jack was not in the best place, so we accept that. And that's it. I mean, it's true what the restoration said. It's correct what they give to us. So it is what it is. Now we have to think about the race. For sure, when we have to start from the back, last position, especially in this track, is much more complicated and race. It's I cannot say over, but we need.
Yeah, absolutely. As the guys mentioned, a big decision. It seems as though it's been played out this weekend with potentially will help the V4 project, and on the other side, young, up-and-coming talent which we know you've worked with before and have got the best out of. So it seems, on the outside, a very difficult decision. What are the pros and the cons of both?
As you can imagine, it's not easy. You already said we had a couple of meetings. We are, let's say, in a difficult situation because we really need to know what is good for the project, and also in terms of future, we need to think about it. So we need a couple of days to finalize everything. The deadline was already 1 month ago. We move forward because, as I said before, it's a difficult decision. So, but in my opinion, in a few days next week, we will know who will be the rider.
We'll keep a close eye on Pramac's social media accounts. As the guy said, sounds as though Jack might have won the battle, but I know you're not going to tell me that right now.
I'll let you know soon.
Thanks, Gino.
Thanks very much, Jack. Thanks very much to Pramac Yamaha boss Gino Borsoi. Fair to say, there was a scary-looking incident there involving Fermin Aldeguer and Ralph Hernandez. That's going through turn 11. So yeah, I mean, you can understand on Thursday why Jack Miller was getting a little bit frustrated with this delay in deciding who will be alongside Toprak Bazgatlioglu in Pramac Yamaha next season. As Gino Borsoi just said, the deadline initially was set 1 month ago, so 4 weeks is a long time in racing, particularly when you're desperately waiting to find out if you're going to be on the grid in 2026. I do believe as part of some of the behind-the-scenes Yamaha meetings that Jack Miller was inevitably involved, and he did offer some apologies for his strong words to the media on Thursday, but you can completely understand. I mean, yeah, maybe it was a deliberate ploy, a tactic from Jack to try and hurry up the situation. If it was, yeah, it does look like Plan A has pulled off.
Yeah, because there was so many rumours swirling around the paddock over the course of the weekend that maybe Manu Gonzalez was going to be lined up for that seat down at Pramac Yamaha. He looks like he might now stay put in Moto2 and potentially have an opportunity to move up into MotoGP in subsequent years. But of course, from Jack Miller's point of view, not only is he waiting on a decision from Yamaha, but of course he will have then told suitors for him in the World Superbike paddock that a deadline was the summer break, and he'd be able to give them an answer on whether he'll be taking up their options. And of course, there are teams over in that paddock that are also waiting on Yamaha's decision to know whether Jack Miller is available to them next season. Fabio Quartararo, we've seen this a little bit from him. The only thing that he had to smile at yesterday was that he was in the top 10, but once again, some French tempers flaring under the crash helmet of the 2021 World Champion.
Yeah, on the absolute limit, he said, on the ragged edge, riding like this, just pushing to the absolute limit on that factory Yamaha. He thought, really couldn't find or believe he had anything more than that 137.671. He was really under the cosh yesterday. That was Quartararo, and as he mentioned, a real tough lap to find, and it was still 0.6 of a second behind Acosta. Came here after Austria, a Red Bull ring round, which he described as frankly ridiculous. So off the pace were all four Yamahas. Zero expectations is how Fabio described his thoughts coming here pre-weekend. We can't say the same about this rider, can we? Nea Bastianini, who really has hit top form now on that KTM RC16. He was fifth fastest yesterday, was the beast, less than 4/10 behind Pedro Acosta. And at the moment in this FP2 session, we've got two KTMs inside the top three. Acosta leading with a 137.780, and not too far behind him in third place is the beast. And they're talking to the media yesterday saying it really does feel like he's going to be qualifying on those first two races, because right now, if he's got one big weak point, he's certainly the weakest of the KTMs out on circuit. It's the stars, a very different clutch from on the factory KTM compared to the Ducati's been used to for the last 4 years. But you have to say, the beast looking good in Balaton once again.
He qualifies well. Generally, we see him go forwards in the race, so it's well for Bastianini. We know he's going to be on the front four rows of the grid, whatever happens later on this morning, having made his way through automatically through the Q2. Although the KTM story is rather as it was yesterday, to be honest. Acosta and Bastianini up towards the sharp end. Espargaro is up in 8th place, exactly as he was yesterday. He's through the Q2. And Brad Binder, the sole KTM, the outlier really, who's struggling relatively speaking. He's down in 14th in this session on 1:38.6, and he pointed out one particular part of the racetrack, sector 3, where he was struggling so badly yesterday. Sector 3 takes in the chicane of 9 and 10, the hairpin of 11, and then the chicane of 12 and 13. Brad Binder was the slowest rider of everybody yesterday in that third sector, and it's clearly not a bike problem because Espargaro was the fastest rider through there.
Yeah, he said simply too slow all day in that sector 3. He said it was like he was riding on a wet track, just no grip whatsoever on that factory KTM. In sector 3 alone, he was surrendering half a second. I mean, around a short layout like this Balaton Park is, you can't be giving up 500ths and hope to be anywhere near competitive. So yeah, there was work to be done as far as Binder is concerned. Yesterday, Joan Mir on the factory Honda, impressing once again, 7th fastest, 4th race in a row. He's gone directly into Q2. He's inside the top 10 once again. What about the factory Aprilia? Marco Bezzecchi said he was really struggling to get the Aprilia stopped in those hard braking zones yesterday. We thought those sort of particular gremlins were over after they performed so admirably at the Stop and Go Red Bull Ring last weekend. Bez 9th at the moment, and Jorge Martin, plenty more to come from him. Race pace wise, it looks like Martin's well capable of being in that battle for the top 6. As he alluded to once again yesterday, it's that lack of confidence to really push the limit on soft rubber that is holding him back. If he can find that explosive pace once again, well, you better watch out. Well, we know that Luca Marini yesterday was armed with a new Honda chassis, which he told the media last night he did debut last time out in Austria. It worked pretty well, didn't it? 9th yesterday was Marini. At the moment, he's down in 16th spot. What's going on down inside HRC, Jack?
Yeah, not quick enough to spot it last time out in Austria. Luca also mentioned to me, but clearly they've got more than just one in the team boxes behind, because for the first time, Joan Mir trying it this morning as well. So, as we reported yesterday, Luca did basically all of his running on it. Yesterday morning session and, crucially, all of yesterday afternoon session. He said that it felt that it was a step forward, not a massive one, but just gave him a little bit extra feeling on the front end. And clearly those comments have been extremely positive, because Joan Mir getting the first taste of it now.
Yeah, top reporting as always from down in pit lane, Jack. Good spot, mate. Well done. Pedro Acosta then at 1:37.70, 780 rather, I should say. Still the reference lap time in this session. Johan Zarco's finding life here in Hungary. I'm sure tougher than what he was anticipating. 20th yesterday, certainly not helped by a late get-off at turn 11 when he lost the front on the LCR Honda. At the moment, things not really getting much better in FP2 this morning as he finds himself right at the back of the pack. He was doing a lot of work though, of course, as so many riders will be, on used rubber from yesterday.
He was moving around a lot there for Johan Zarco, and he wasn't particularly troubling the apex of turn 5 as he completely overshot it at the end of the back straight. Zarco, another big hitter, going through qualifying 1 in what, around about 15-20 minutes time. Jorge Martin, Marco Bezzecchi, Fabio Di Gianantonio, Pecco Bagnaia, Brad Binder, Johan Zarco. Certainly 6 big names that would fancy a dart at qualifying 2, but only 4 can make it through. Only 2 can make it through, of course.
So it's Acosta that's leading the way. He looks fantastic. Is this the weekend where Pedro Acosta becomes a Moto3, Moto2 and MotoGP winner? Of course, he knocked on the door so many times that last year, 16 times a Grand Prix winner, and he just removed that little bit of errant tape that was flapping around on the side of that factory KTM. He certainly looks like he's going to pose the biggest threat to Marc Marquez's hopes of a 7th successive double victory as he looks to build that 142-point lead in the World Championship. Talk about perfect timing. It's almost like we planned it, bigging up Pedro Acosta and his hopes of that first MotoGP success here this weekend. He's on the right, so we can hear from Ross Bagnaia, who's with Jack.
Yeah, he is indeed. After, as you guys were describing, a very, very positive opening day of the Hungarian Grand Prix for Pedro Aki. It looks as though this circuit suits him down to the ground, and those improvements on the bike are allowing him to be right up there. I'm sure you're confident going into today and tomorrow.
Yeah, so far without big problems here. Of course, not too much expectations for the different and new track, but yes, it's working well and actually fitting for, let's say, the progress what we have done in the last races. So personally, I feel that it's more important to keep it constant, not highlights, and step by step we understand more what we are doing.
We saw at the start of the session Pedro trying to go around the outside of Marc Marquez into the opening corner. Is that a signal and a sign of his confidence at the moment?
For sure confidence, but I don't think that he's too much focusing for kind of details. So especially now here when everything is new, I think it's important to use the maximum of the track time all the time and just to develop yourself and get more info.
We have to give a word to Paul Espargaro as well. Inside the top 10 yesterday, despite trying some items at the start of the session, for someone who does limited time on the bike, how impressive is that to be beating Bagnaia, Martin, Fabio Quartararo, our last 3 world champions?
Of course, really impressive. Of course, we are really lucky to have the guy who is understand his role very well. He's doing really good test work, but of course, time by time when Hungary rider get a chance to be also on the race weekend, as Paul showed, he's professional in all the ways.
He said yesterday, as you mentioned, still got that hunger. He still wants to compete. There was some talk about him wanting to get onto a World Superbike next year. If he wanted that, would KTM step in his way from returning to competitive action?
I think he's fully focused for his work at the moment. So
Thanks, Aki. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thanks to Akiayo, thanks to Jack down in pit lane. Yes, we should have mentioned Paul Espargaro shortly before now. Red Bull KTM Tech 3 start 8th fastest yesterday, replacing Maverick Vinales. What a performance. He said he was like a kid yesterday, just loving life, circulating Balaton on an RC16. And yeah, there was this story that emerged that, you know, he's fallen back in love with racing. He doesn't feel like at 34 years of age, his racing career is over. Maybe the possibility of more wild cards could float his boat with KTM in 2026. But there's been this sort of emerging story, as Jack just mentioned, where he's reportedly offered himself to Ruben Ducati to partner Nicolo Bulega over in World Superbikes next season. Now, he didn't sort of confirm it. He was very coy when asked about it by the media, but I have to say he didn't also deny it. I mean, he could have shut it down straight away and gone, no, I'm happy with my TV duties at DAZN here in the paddock in MotoGP, which he does a fantastic job as an analyst and pundit. He could have said, I'm happy to carry on being KTM's test rider. He didn't slam the door completely shut. Maybe it's a little bit ajar, but I think if you're a World Superbike fan, if you're a Ducati fan over in the WSB paddock, mouth-watering if you think Paul Espargaro might be alongside Nicolo Bulega next year.
Well, it's clear that the fire is still burning for Paul, as much as, of course, his outlook on life has changed a little bit since that horrible accident in Portimao a couple of years or so ago. But what we've also clearly found out in the last couple of appearances from Paul, both in Brno and here, is that he is still plenty quick enough to compete at this level. It's very rare that you see substitute riders, test riders or wild cards, whichever Paul happens to be, whichever weekend we see him, be as competitive as this. Of course, Brno was a track that was new to a lot of MotoGP, and of course this circuit is new to everybody. Marco Bezzecchi here now getting a little hot under the collar too, with some Italian swear words being shouted under his crash helmet as his troubles continue. But sure, Paul Espargaro has got so much still to offer as a Grand Prix rider, still only 34 years of age, and we've seen World Superbike champions an older age than that.
Yeah, still young enough, still certainly fast enough, as he proved in Brno when he scored points in both the sprint and the Grand Prix, replacing Maverick Vinales in the Grand Prix of Czechia. Of course, we wish Maverick a speedy recovery. He is absent. He's still suffering with that recovering left shoulder. He suffered in that wet Q2 crash in the Saxon ring. Really did bring an abrupt halt to what had been an excellent first start for 2025 for the Spaniard at Tech 3 KTM. Joan Mir then, equipped with that updated Honda chassis. Well, if he's out on it right now, which we believe he is, a 138.079, showing great potential once again as the factory Honda rider. Jorge Martin, as well as ghosted up inside the top 6, as mentioned, there's absolutely nothing wrong with Martin's race pace. He's just seeking that little bit of confidence, that little bit of trust in both himself and the Aprilia, in terms of being able to fire in that hot lap when he really needs it at a crucial phase of the weekend, the back end of practice, and certainly in Q1 and Q2 sessions.
The worry is for Jorge Martin, if he doesn't get through Q1 shortly, what use is that race pace to him around a circuit such as this? So difficult this rotate. You feel like some riders are going to be taking some big risks at the start of the sprint later on, 3 p.m. local time, and at the Grand Prix tomorrow at 2 p.m, because that's going to be the biggest opportunity to make up some early progress.
We're riding on board then with Acosta. It's Bagnaia on the 63 Ducati directly ahead of him. Acosta tried to have a look at the factory Ducati Marc Marquez yesterday, and unfortunately it all went wrong when he high-sided off throttle, a nasty high-side of turn 2. They power out of the final corner, turn 17, this short burst then down the start-finish straight, then hard on the brakes into what is a very tight right-hander into turn 1, even tighter now going through turn 2. This is where Andrea Iannone instigated a bit of chaos in one of the 3 World Superbike races here last month. Let's hope that this clean runs through that tight first sector in all 3 main Grand Prix tomorrow and the sprint this afternoon. Just a quick reminder, it is 3 p.m. local time, as always, lights out for the sprint, over 13 laps. Somebody looks to try and knock Marc Marquez off his perch. Somebody looks to finally pinch a gold medal from around the neck of Marc. 6 successive sprint wins, 6 successive Grand Prix wins. He's cruising, cantering towards that 7th MotoGP world title. As we mentioned a few months ago, it's been baptisms of fire in many respects here in Balaton for Johan Zarco. 20th yesterday, 21st. He's lapping this morning, and Jack's got an update on the LCR Honda rider.
Yeah, unusual for the Frenchman to be dead last, 2.1 seconds off, but even worse than that, he's half a second adrift of the penultimate rider, Raul Fernandez. So I just asked Lucio Cecchinello whether he had any technical problems this morning. He said there's no technical issues with the bike, but obviously, as you mentioned, he had his struggles yesterday. They tried to make a big setup change this morning to see if that could answer some of the problems that he was having, but it feels as though those setup changes took him in the wrong direction yet again. So they've gone back to their original base in the hope that Johan can try and make something work. But whilst the other Hondas are flying inside the top 10 and look really strong, it's surprising to see Johan really struggling so far this weekend.
Yeah, it is indeed, Jack. Yeah, thanks very much for that info on Zarco's progress. He has actually just finally started to make moves forward. 21st up to 18th. That's done Raul Fernandez, and now down to last. He's been chasing his tail over the last few Grand Prix, has Zarco. Not helped by the crash at turn 11 yesterday. No top 10 though in the last 6 since that brilliant 2nd place at Silverstone. And a best of 12th since then in Assen and Red Bull. In 17 points he scored in the last 6 Grand Prix. Yeah, that early season blitz has sort of tapered off of late, hasn't it, for the 35-year-old?
Well, it has been in the last 4 qualifying 2s. That streak feels like it's under a little bit of threat here this morning. Of course, the large reason that he's in qualifying 1 is, of course, he had a crash late in practice, although whether he would have made it through anyway is open to debate. So Zarco looking to make it a full complement of Hondas later on in qualifying 2. Of course, only 3 of them on track this weekend, and we send our very best wishes to Espargaro, who has gone under the surgeon's knife after fracturing a couple of vertebrae in his lower back with a cycling crash earlier in the week. Of course, he was due to replace Sonket Chantra here this weekend. Only really when he arrived here at Balaton Park on Thursday did he realise just how potentially serious the injuries were. They are serious enough to rule him out of competitive action here.
Just love watching Acosta in full flow when he's at one with that KTM. He's so spectacular to watch. Here he is now, muscling the RC16 through one of the 3 chicane complexes around this Balaton Park circuit. Out of the final corner he goes, darts to the finish line. Good time to pick Acosta up in that 4th sector, because that was his best work of this morning session here in FP2. That was a 137.363 from Acosta. Crew Chief Paul Trevathan admiring the work of his young charge. Acosta has only ever had 1 pole position in MotoGP. Pole positions have been few and far between for KTM. I think they've had just 4, haven't they, in over 160 Grand Prix. Well set for challenge, sliding that KTM beautifully there, wasn't he, Pedro Acosta? That shows, that's the signs of a confident rider, a rider who's got his mojo back. What about Pecco Bagnaia, who had a pretty miserable Friday to say the least? 14th in practice. It's been, well, initially it looked like he was slightly better as he made the early running in this practice session, although he's been dropped back down to 18th place, and rather alarmingly once again he's over a second off the best pace. Jack, any Any thoughts on what's been going on with the Italian?
Yeah, I have to say, if you're a Pecco Bagnaia fan at home, his body language at the end of that last run is not going to give you a lot of confidence that he's managed to find some answers to his issues this morning, throwing his hands around, a lot of head shaking. He's clearly unhappy, and I think, as you guys mentioned earlier on, as he mentioned in his debrief yesterday, he felt in that test with the Panigales just a month or so ago that this was going to be a circuit that would really show up all of the issues he's had since the beginning of the season. It is really coming to the fore now. Bagnaia does not look at all happy in the back of the box when speaking to Christian Gavarini and Gigi Dell'Igna, that they're working tirelessly, but it looks as though it's quite a problem that they just cannot find any solution to.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough watch, isn't it, right now? Thanks again, Jack. Bagnaia has missed the podium in 6 of our opening 13 Grand Prix. As we mentioned in commentary previously this weekend, this is a rider of 11 Grand Prix last year, put together, despite coming short ultimately in the final reckoning, put together in winning terms, one of the best seasons we've ever seen in the Premier class. Pedro Acosta hops off the factory KTM, yeah, and quite rightly so. Gets an embrace from his crew chief, Paul Trevathan. Taps and handshakes and high fives all round from his crew. Because they know Acosta's in the game here big time. He'll be certainly a big contender for the sprint win and the Grand Prix win. More pressing matters coming up though for Acosta shortly, as he fights for pole position. But once again, he was fastest in FP1 yesterday morning, second to Acosta yesterday afternoon. But he's taken that top spot away from Acosta in this morning session. It seems like we've got a bit of a pattern has already emerged here this weekend in Balaton Park. Are we potentially, for the first time, a battle, a locking of horns that we waited a long time for, potentially Pedro Acosta versus Marc Marquez at the moment? Seems like the ingredients are all there, potentially, Lewis, for the two Spanish stars to go toe-to-toe.
Marc Marquez potentially against the rider that many have touted as the next Marc Marquez. We shall see. What we do know is that Pedro Acosta has got the stomach for the fight and did feel like a little bit of a shot across the bows earlier on in that free practice 2 session when Acosta came up alongside Marc Marquez in the run to turn 1. That could be the head-to-head on the run down to that first corner later on in the sprint, but it is going to be a crucial 15 minutes in Q2 for Acosta, because he has dropped the ball a few times in qualifying this season. We're yet to see him on the front row of the grid in 2025.
Yesterday, Bagnaia said on screens right now as the under fire Pecco. He said yesterday pretty pessimistic about his chances of getting into the top 2 in this upcoming Q1 session. He just sort of stares blankly into the distance. If he's looking at those timing screens, it makes for painful reading right now, because he was 18th. I mean, when did we have the practice session which ended with Bagnaia 14th and nearly 3/4 of a second off the pace, and then the very next session in FP2 he's 18th, 1.1 seconds off the pace. You really do fear, don't you, that he's going to struggle to get himself into Q2. No problems over for his teammate Marc Marquez, fastest in FP2.
1,000th of a second between Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta. It has been that close so much of the weekend. There was just 6,000ths between them yesterday. Fabio Di Gianantonio third. He's going through Q1, of course, shortly. Fomin Aldeguer fourth from Bezzecchi, Bastianini, Mir and Binder. Alex Marquez with his 3-place group penalty puts pressure on him in qualifying. 9th ahead of Martin Oliveira and Ayagura. The latter of those two still identical times. Luca Marini 13th ahead of Espargaro and Fabio Quartararo. Frankie Morbidelli 16th. John Zarco, as he looks to dig himself out of a bit of a hole, 17th. Bagnaia, no signs of digging his way out of his in P18, with Ralph Fernandez, Alex Rins and Jack Miller the only riders behind him.
So coming up shortly, we go qualifying here in Balaton, a Q1 which features Hoy Martin, Marco Bezzecchi and Pecco Bagnaia, but back in control here in the Grand Prix of Hungary as he goes in search of a 7th successive sprint win this afternoon. Your FP2 leader is the MotoGP World Championship leader, Marc Marquez. welcome back to the Michelin Grand Prix of Hungary. Welcome back to the new Balaton Park circuit. With 30-second different venue to host a Grand Prix in the modern four-stroke era. Starting to cloud over a little bit right now after a rather pleasant sunny start to Sprint Saturday. Ambient temperatures down to a cool 22 degrees. Thankfully, some strong winds that were buffeting our team factory Aprilia teammate Marco Bezzecchi, Fabio Di Gianantonio already